this makes me want to go back to all of the previous episodes with her in it. Look through it with this lens to see if this is what she was doing the whole time, guiding Din to figure these things out on his own. She can't tell him what his way is, but she can guide him to this. That scene made me feel so many things, and I love the armor now. Like, that was so cool to see.
Krypton to Alderaan. Krypton to Alderaan. Krypton to Alderaan. Krypton to Alderaan.
Welcome, everyone, to Krypton to Alderaan. I'm Joey, your Star Wars lover, and with me is Royish Good Looks.
Hello, podcast. Hello, Joey.
Hello! And we're the podcast that analyzes nerdy pop culture, but it's mostly Star Wars. In this episode, we'll be discussing The Mandalorian Chapter 24, The Return. But first, we'd really love to hear what y'all thought of the season finale, and really the season as a whole, and if you feel like it brought the season together. Let us know in the comments, and please also subscribe to keep up with our Star Wars content. Royce, we just broke past 300 subscribers on YouTube.
Woo! 300.
I think at this point, we're at 350 or almost 350. So we've got some really great momentum here. I love it. Let's keep it going. We'd really appreciate it.
With 1 million more on the way.
You can also find us on any social media. Just search Krypton to Alderaan. We'd love to hear from you wherever, whenever, wherever, whenever. All right, that's enough of that. Let's talk about The Return. Here is the last official synopsis for The Mandalorian Season 3. This one's a bit longer than the others have been, so get ready. The Mandalorian and his allies confront their enemies.
That's probably the most accurate.
Certainly the most, probably in syllables, yeah. One of the first things I noticed in this episode was the change in music. The main theme was different. I don't know the language for how different, but different.
Yeah, the main theme sounded a lot more like you get the crawl in A New Hope. Like this really triumphant, heroic theme. It felt the most anthemic it's ever felt. Not this like lone wolf sort of sound that it normally is and kind of like brooding. It was like, we're going into the final battle and we need that hero theme. I love the punch up for the music. Is that what you were thinking with it?
Yeah, I really loved it. And it's really interesting to hear you say it's less of the lone wolf thing. And then Bo's words are echoing in my brain. Mandalorians are stronger together. Like this was the culmination, the final fight with everyone, which I didn't think about, but is very cool to incorporate in the music. Star Wars music is always so incredible, right? The fact that we could sit here and talk about it and talk about the themes of the show, how they're reflected in the music is also very cool. Another thing, to jump immediately to the end, the little theme at the end was so different than anything we've heard in this show before, right? With the cabin and Din and Grogu outside their cabin. That was also like very nice.
Yeah. So I want to give a quick shout out to one of my favorite podcasts, The Soundtrack Show. They just came back from a long hiatus. They just did an episode on E.T., or a part 1. If you love talking about music and soundtrack specifically, you got to check out The Soundtrack Show. So that ending scene, Mando literally like kicking back on his front porch, Grogu by the pond, playing with the animals. You're noticing like, well, they have this theme, but it's like a little different again. It's the classic theme that we've heard, the da-na-na-na-na-na-na. But there's a couple themes that they're intertwining in the end there that we're already familiar with, which, like you're saying, this is the classic Star Wars thing. You have these melodic phrases that come in and out, these motifs. The thing that they really pronounce at the end is that it's this bright major key that we're in. The Mandalorian theme normally resolves down to this minor chord, you know, that brooding, na-na-na-na-na, blah, and you're left kind of hanging. Like you're going to go on this adventure and you don't know how things are going to shape up. You're going to lose an engine, you know, someone's going to get captured. All this stuff is going to go haywire. But now they've got a cabin outside of Navarro. And Greef Karga's like, hey, you can relax here in between your adventures. And there they are relaxing. And you get this musical resolution. It's a perfect composer moment of like, how do I illustrate the theme in the music, the theme of the show and the plot in the music? Yeah, we end on this happy major chord. Like you said, whether or not you can define musically what's going on, you get that feeling of we landed on home base. We landed on this bright major chord rather than this dark, brooding minor chord that we're used to. But it's the same melodic theme with a different chordal arrangement underneath. You still get the same melody, but it infers sort of a different vibe behind it. And it's the happy ending, you know?
Interesting. So a happy ending. So everyone has been kind of talking about how this kind of seems like a series finale more than a season finale. And it's interesting to hear that the music maybe also plays that way. Like this is an ending, right? Maybe this is the end of this chapter of this story. But that's something that I really like about the way that this episode ended. I would also like this to be the actual end, like someday Din and Grogu just retire on a farm somewhere, right? It's like Pabu with Clone Force 99. But I really want this to be the end of this arc and the beginning of something new.
Well, so I, of course, would love 100 more seasons of Din and Grogu and more adventures. Like, I want to see more The Mandalorian series. But it's funny because we were texting back and forth before recording of like, hey, what do you think that ending meant? And I was like, dude, that's a series finale if I ever saw one, whether they called it or not. And again, you had brought up the musical point. I wasn't even really thinking about it. But to me, we hit that home base chord. And the idea is like, if we went to the minor chord at the end, that's what you would call a deceptive cadence in music, where you think you're going to go one way, you go the other, and still maybe leaves you hanging for a true resolution. But we didn't get a deceptive cadence. We just got a proper, we're back to the home base chord, the number one major chord, everyone lives happily ever after ending. I told you that is not a question, that chord, that musical ending is not a question, it is the answer. So it doesn't really set up more information. I think we kind of selfishly want more, though it does clue you into the next things that they can do will certainly be different than what came before maybe, but that cadence is just a proper ending. It's not we're looking forward to the future. Maybe if you listen to the little bell theme there, the that is a little mystical, kind of like Rey's theme, you know, that leaves you with some intrigue. But the fact that you're ending on that one chord is definitive to me. So I could be happy with that being the season finale or series finale. That would make sense to me. But we want more. Yeah. And maybe that's signaling that the next season just has a different tone, which would make sense. If that's the case, the next season, you would expect it to carry on some of that musical theme as well, right? Start triumphant, bold, and bright, rather than regress to that brooding theme again, which Mandalorian has a problem with that. Last season, we gave Grogu away, but we brought him back, you know? Right. So that's something that they would have to weigh. We can't go into next season and be all emo, you know? Let's be big, bright, brass in your face.
So a definitive end. I really like that. So to clarify what I mean is that I would love for this to symbolize the definitive end of this arc.
Sure.
Maybe I'm thinking of these 3 seasons as a trilogy, and I wasn't necessarily happy with the way this last piece of the trilogy went. And the ending, this definitive ending that we're talking about, really makes me feel like I have been feeling like they were trying to shove Mandalorian into this greater story that they have been wanting to tell. Like, whether the Mandalorian likes it or not, they're shoving it into this Imperial Remnant storyline, which I have seen like maybe limit some of the episodes this season. So saying thematically and musically, this is a definitive end. This is the end of the story. Gideon's gone. Pershing's gone. The Empire / Project Necromancer might not even know about Grogu. That was Gideon's thing. So maybe this ends the capture Grogu to clone him arc. It was set up as a trilogy. The first 3 parts of the trilogy are over, and now we get a new thing. I feel like this season was a bumpy ride to get this ending, but it does really feel like they're saying we're going back, you know, classic Rick and Morty adventures from now on. We're going back to Din and Grogu adventures. They say it in the dialogue like they did every single thing this season. They say, you know, case by case basis,
right?
Which to me means weekly adventures, which who knows how we'll feel about it when it comes out. But that is so much more intriguing to me, saying this is the way the Mandalorian's going to interact with the Imperial remnants. He's going to be a bounty hunter, which is what he knows. He's going to raise his son, and they are going to go after these bad guys, right? Like the guy with the glands that he's hunting in the first season. He wasn't a bad guy, but now he's using his bounty hunter qualifications for good.
Right.
For the New Republic. And that is so much more intriguing to me. I'm very excited about the future of Din Djarin and Din Grogu because of the way they've set this up.
Yeah, I agree. It could either be a definitive series finale or this arc finale, and now they're free to do whatever adventures they want to do in the future. Like, both work equally well.
With that said, all of these themes and musical themes that we're putting together, how did you feel in this episode? This is the most emotionally invested I've been this season. Whereas like we were doing these Bad Batch reviews and I was emotionally invested in almost every episode. Not to compare the two, they're just both Star Wars and I love being emotionally invested in these stories.
Oh, I hope we compare these two in the future for a clickbait thumbnail. I think like this last set of episodes had the stakes set up that you're like, oh my goodness, maybe Din doesn't make it through. You know, oh no, maybe Grogu doesn't make it through when he's separated from Din in this season finale. And then Bo shows up and the Darksaber's crushed. Holy cow, maybe Bo doesn't make it through. What is going to happen? I can't exactly predict it. And that's great storytelling when you're like, maybe they don't make it through, you know? That's perfect. Like you said, you're invested because you aren't sure what's going to happen. That's perfect. We get the happy ending, which is nice. I would agree that you're not consistently invested through this season because we didn't always have those sort of stakes. Like when they were on Plaisir 15, I was never worried the battle droids were going to, take out a main character or whatever. But that's also not what you would expect from like the mid-season lull of any series, really. Of course, it's going to be the climactic finale when things could go either terribly wrong or terribly right. Or not terribly right, but they chose to go the happy ending versus the not happy ending. I think that's fine. Like we said, at least I said, I think in a previous episode, I just want it to end and have the big triumphant music at the end. And that's basically what we got. And I'm satisfied by that. I have no complaints about how they did it. They eventually got you emotionally invested. It's not like they totally dropped the ball in the finale and you're like, what was the point of that, right?
Well, yeah, maybe at some points, but yeah, I do think that there's room to incorporate emotional investment in every episode. Like the Bad Batch episode, The Outpost, was somewhere in the middle. I was extremely emotionally invested in that. With this, they packed it all into one episode. Again, I think that that's what they did for this entire season. They kind of packed everything into the last two episodes. I'm not talking about action-wise. I'm just talking about like resolving the plot that they've dangled in front of us for the first 2 3/4 seasons of the show.
It's a pacing issue. Like all of the material was there, but we just got it jammed in rather than spread out.
Again, we're talking about being generous and not doing rewrites. And I don't mean any of that. I'm just saying like the little moments of Din and Grogu, and you could see Bo's emotion when she's fighting Gideon and she screams like twice. She screams when attacking him. You can feel it. Axe during this episode was just like, he flies into the cruiser and he's like, get everybody off the ship. Go, go, go. Like you could feel the intensity and the emotion when the Praetorian guards take Grogu behind the door and Din gives up fighting Gideon. He yells no, and he goes after Grogu. He gets shot in the back with a rocket and still goes. The emotions. And then, of course, when Grogu protects them in the flames with the Force, and that music that played there, also incredible. And then the end. I don't mean to like just bring up all the emotional, the moments in the show that made me feel, I have feelings, your classic.
I felt stuff.
But when Din finally realizes, oh, I'm this kid's father. I want to be this kid's father. Those are the moments that I'm talking about. There's room for a little bit of those things in every episode, right? Which is what I love. Like Star Wars pew-pews are great. The found family stuff, the emotional storytelling, the relationships, those kinds of things are what makes Star Wars special to me.
Right. So you just hit on it. The found family stuff is such a fun way to get people emotionally invested in the characters. Whereas this season spent a lot of time trying to jump into the larger world that they're building. And so we got an imbalance of the emotional stuff and the heavy canon plot stuff. Dude, another musical moment you're reminding me of, the Praetorian Guards show up. You get sort of the, Allah, la, la, like Duel
Right.
of Fates sort of thing. Talk about getting emotionally invested. Like, who doesn't love Duel of Fates or that battle? But that moment was when I was like, oh no, if this is invoking the theme from Duel of Fates in that battle, not everybody makes it out alive at the end.
Yeah.
So I was thinking like, oh no, Din or Grogu, one of those is going to go, maybe both of them. And again, not knowing what was going to happen, and that really epic choir tone in the background being like, oh man, the intensity is there, totally draws you into the battle rather than just them fighting and have it being like an action sequence with explosive sound effects. And although there was a lot of great Beskar on Beskar, like clink, clank, pow,
The whirling of the gears of his
the
suit.
servos and everything. Yeah.
It's just like incredible sound design. Like, must be so fun to do that sound design. Oh yeah, I didn't even notice that sort of heavy gravity moment of music with the Praetorian Guards that come out. I didn't put two and two together. I kind of wish I did, to be like, is Din gonna bite it right now? Like, is this gonna be the end? But now I like thinking about the end scene that we were talking about, the music in the end scene being the just this once, Rose, everybody lives. I love that. Did you think this episode set up Din as something new, as someone new?
Yeah, I've been waiting for like Din to find a footing. What is Din, you know? And it's weird at the end of this episode, he says, I'm a bounty hunter by trade. I guess I'll be a bounty hunter again. And you're like, that's interesting, because that brings us back to like the first episode, except that you're a bounty hunter for the good guys now, rather than
Right.
just for like random people, like you're saying. So it's kind of a weird full circle thing, but the other side of the coin in a way. I don't know if it's a new Din. It's just he's got kind of a new lease on life where he's like, I've got the new home. I am now adopted Grogu, even though I was already his father. Now it's like official, you know, within my clan and my tribes that, again, this like definitive ending. Now we know where things stand. I have a home. I don't live on the Razor Crest. I don't live in a cave. I have a cabin now, and I have a family. Totally different way to look at his situation, even though it's really not much different from like mid-season 1 when he is taking care of Grogu and he's on the run. He's no longer on the run. He's kind of just safe now. I don't want to keep harping back to this, but like, I'm totally okay with this being the end if it is. Obviously, I don't know if they plan to do another season, but like, it's so wrapped up. I'm just happy with it. It doesn't matter what they do next. It's all neatly tied together.
Yeah, I do like calling back to season 1, where I think we saw much more of Din being a like much more competent fighter in season 1 than maybe we did in season 2 and most of season 3. But this episode and last episode, he just comes out swinging. It reestablishes him as less of a himbo, I think, and more of a like badass bounty hunter fighter. Like in season 1, when he takes on the stormtroopers, he walks out of the building, right? It's that iconic shot where he walks out of the building and gets shot in the Beskar and just kind of shakes it off, but goes after the trooper. You know, it doesn't phase him at all. Whereas in a lot of season 2 and a lot of this season, he kind of is bad at fighting, and Bo is much more competent
Yeah.
fighter. So I really like this reestablishing that version of him, maybe elevating his presence. Listen, I love goofy Star Wars. Goofy Star Wars is great. It's something that makes Star Wars special, but this certainly like added more stakes. And I don't think just because it was a finale, I think it really was establishing Din as what he's going to be coming up next. It was really cool to see.
I think he's always been a competent fighter, though. It's just that they wrote a couple funny scenes where like he gets duped on occasion, or he makes kind of weird decisions that you don't necessarily agree with, or specifically when he's with Bo, that she's on a different level, being able to wield the Darksaber,
Yeah,
having been
true.
raised in a different tribe, that they sort of approach situations differently. I don't think that they meant to write him as incompetent at any point. It's just kind of how it came off through whatever plot was going on. You know, in my headcanon, it's not like Din's a moron and he all of a sudden was like, oh, now I have something to fight for, so I will be competent.
Right.
That's not how I'm reading it, but I can see how that you could interpret it that way for sure. It's a headcanon that you have, though, that like now he's more competent because he's become the father, and I
Right.
enjoy that interpretation more.
Yes. Much less of a like someone new has taken the wheel in like controlling how Din works, and much more of like, this is what he is becoming as a father and a Mandalorian. This is setting him up to be both of those things. So let's talk about R5, the unsung hero, or maybe sung. Maybe he'll take the creed and he will be written into the song. I don't know. But I think a lot of this stuff with Din, this is when I started to realize all of this, when he is interacting with R5 over the comms.
I got all the member berries from A New Hope, shut down all the garbage smashers on the detention level. No, shut them all down. That was clearly the homage there, which I loved.
Right.
What I really loved is when R5 landed next to that little computer port thing, he looks over the ledge.
Yeah, he's scared.
And then later on, one of the mouse droids falls off of the ledge. So that was a fun little moment there. Yeah, it's just classic Star Wars. Like the R2 units can plug into anything and control things without needing a password or like Touch ID or whatever. I guess that is Touch ID in a way. It's just great. It just works. And like you said, he's on the comms communicating and like delegating to him like, hey, can you take care of this for me? I'm waiting for you. Okay, you're not taking care of it, but I'm still going to hold my own and not lose my stuff. Yeah, it was just a great, fun scene. Yeah, I love that. And everyone's going to need an R5 pop now. Whether or not you liked him before, like you said, he saved the day. The astromechs are kind of the unsung hero of the Star Wars franchise.
Yeah. Din's interaction with R5 during that whole thing was just so fatherly.
For someone that doesn't like droids.
Right. I definitely think that was setting it up for the end. I also think, apart from it being a very New Hope thing, Din is so loyal. He believes the most important thing is loyalty. And so that means that he also believes that anyone on his side is willing to do anything to accomplish anyone's goal. If one person's goal relies on somebody else, then that somebody else is 100% in. And we see that in this scene. Like, I don't speak binary, but I've asked you to do this thing. This is my goal, and to accomplish my goal, I need you to do this. And obviously you're going to do it because we're loyal to each other, right? Which I loved seeing, and it really kind of like opened my eyes a little bit to Din and why he is the Mandalorian that he is, and then how he's encouraging R5 the whole time by believing in him. And he keeps saying, good job, buddy, that kind of thing, which I also think was just like, we're setting Din up to be a father, finally. Like, he's been reluctant. He's been the reluctant father this whole time. But this was the first time that I've really felt like Din wants this. Din is going to have his little found family. He's going to have R5. He's going to have Grogu on his little farm. I'm emotionally invested because I can see how it's happening. I can see Din changing. I can see what he's fighting for and what he believes about the people who are fighting with him. And I just loved it.
He's got a greater purpose now. Yeah.
You've talked in the past about the video game nature of this show sometimes. Very video gamey, right? With the barrier shields, each shield you get through, you beat the bosses, you get a new weapon, right? The knife, and then the electro staff, and then the blaster, and then you get to the final boss.
Classic.
Yeah. Let's talk about this final boss battle between...
There were a lot of battles to keep track of.
A lot of battles going on. So what did you think of Bo saying, we can't beat them in the air, so let's beat them on the ground, and then fighting all of them in the air?
I mean, the shot where they're flying through each other, like, it's such epic filmography.
So
it
good.
looks great, but then when you couple it with that dialogue, you're like, wait, but you all have jetpacks. That's kind of like your superpower, and you're in the air like the whole time.
Yeah. So you've seen Rebels. Rebels continues to elevate other areas of Star Wars for me. The idea of Sabine teaching Ezra how to use the jetpack, it's not easy. And so just seeing the Mandalorian's proficiency in these jetpacks really elevated that scene for me. Like, it was a lot of work to get them to where it's part of them, right? They have to be focusing on fighting with their weapons and like the enemy, rather than figuring out how to fly or where to go. It's just part of them, right? They just know it. Something you don't need to know in order to make that scene great, because that scene was incredible. But just something that I picked out that I was like, Rebels continues to just like make some Star Wars even better than it already was for me.
They had the training scene earlier this season where there was one of the like younger Mandalorians like taking off with a jetpack and an older one kind of supervising, it looked like. So they clearly train, to get better at all of their skills.
Very cool. Mandalorians are nothing without their trinkets. Oh my goodness. Moff Gideon as a cartoon or anime villain.
Here's my note. What a whiny baby. I wish I had the Force. I love the whole let's aggregate everyone together. I think that's one of the more strong themes. Too bad Moff wasn't in it like the whole time, but Moff says, I'm going to take the cloners, the Jedi, the Mandalorians and stick them all together and have this like awesome trooper. Makes total sense. And then Bo on the other side of that battle is the Mandalorians are stronger together. Like with or without our trinkets, they have the scene where you get Grogu, Din, and Bo versus Moff, who's supposed to be, the culmination of all those things, but he doesn't have the Force, obviously. But, it's the two sides of that coin there. And the ape stronger together thing, I wish they found a different way to phrase that wasn't like so derivative of Planet of the Apes. But, it makes sense that you have Bo, different tribe than Din, and you have Grogu, Jedi, or at least a Force-sensitive Mandalorian. You have all those three factions together. So that's beautiful. I love that. But yeah, Moff is just like, you call him this cartoon anime villain, and I love that they kind of killed him off screen and we didn't see a body and we didn't see like the Shredder.
Right.
What is that Secret of the Ooze when Shredder punches his hand in the end? The doc falls on him, but in the end he punches out or whatever. So, who knows if we see Moff Gideon again, but like I was glad to see him actually have some sort of death on screen. I don't know if it's definitive or not. Of course, I'm glad they beat him. Because, yeah, he was such a whiny baby. Yeah, you got what you deserved, bro.
It's so cool to see them all come together. In the previous episode, Gideon was like, that's not possible. These tribes are sworn enemies, but they all came together to defeat him. I mean no shade when I say cartoon or anime villain. I love cartoon and anime and villains. But just like the whole thing where my clones were almost perfect. They were lacking the one thing I never had, the Force. And then even the way he dies is like an anime villain, right? He's being consumed by flames and his arms are in the air and he's like, no, I love it.
Sure.
I love the over-the-topness for that kind of villain. Like, he's got this really weird cockamamie scheme. He's going to close himself and inject the Force into himself. And it's just really, like, that's cool and fun. Like, that's a fun and funny thing. It was very serious, obviously. And yeah, we don't know where else he might have clones. Even if Gideon Prime is dead, there might be clones somewhere else. Or that weird spider monster might have his fluids on file and be able to make more of him. So Din and Gideon are fighting, and the Praetorian guards take Grogu away, and then Bo comes in to fight Gideon so that Din can go help Grogu. But she comes in head first. It was amazing. It was so cool to see. And then she says to Din, I've got this, go save your kid, which was a bit of an emotional moment. Have you noticed this? Like, this was the moment when I realized that Din has always said the kid. Like, he had just talked to Bo earlier in the episode and he said, we're fine, I've got the kid. And everyone else always says your kid, which makes the scene at the water mean so much more to me, even more special than it already was.
I noticed them using the term kid a lot, and I was kind of getting tired of it because it's like, bro, his name is Grogu. We all know his name, and he's been living with you guys for like quite a while. You guys have literally flown like intergalactically with him. Can you learn his name already? And it's not like he's a Mandalorian and they all look exactly the freaking same. He's a totally different species. So he kind of stands out. His name's Grogu, okay? But like you said, I think thematically, like they bathe him in the waters. He's Din Grogu, which Robin was pointing out that is a little weird, that Bo-Katan Kryze, Satine Kryze, like, why isn't he Grogu Jaren? I don't get that. But they at least now acknowledge that he's part of the Mandalorians officially. Maybe now people will start calling him Grogu. I wish that they would use that term more in the show. Like you said earlier, you're like, well, he's 50 years old and I guess this was off air, we were talking about this. That you're like, well, he's still a baby. Well, like, establish him as a figure in the show rather than calling him the child or the kid, call him Grogu. He's a Mandalorian now. Let's give him the praise he deserves.
Yep, you're the Mandalorian of the house now, Grogu. I hadn't really picked up on that. That is a good point. Like, very rarely do they use his name, but at least at the very end, Greef Karga calls him Din Grogu. But at the end in the waters, when Din is like, I will adopt him as my own, that was Din finally saying my kid instead of the kid. And that just meant so much to me. Like, this is what I'm saying. All of the emotional stuff was packed into this episode. Probably now going forward, he will say my kid. this will be that defining moment. It is official.
I felt this all along, though. It's interesting. Like, I know that moment thematically was like, he's officially his father. What a beautiful moment. And it was. He's been his father since season 1. And in my headcanon, that didn't change anything for how he's felt about Grogu. The moment he decided to save Grogu, he became his father, whether or not he had admitted it.
I think, yes, we were all kind of like shaking Din, saying, no, you're the father. Don't send him away. Don't be like he's better off with someone else. You're his father. And we all had to we had to get Din there. And so this was another big moment for me in the show. Din brings Grogu down the steps to the water and is like, he's no longer a foundling, he's my apprentice. And the armorer says he cannot speak, so he cannot take the creed. He must remain a foundling. This moment changed Din for me, and this moment changed the armorer for me. I'm curious what you think. So the armorer says that and kind of looks away coyly in my mind, as much as you could do with the helmet on. She's like, nope, his parents are far away, if they're even still alive. And she kind of looks away. And it really felt like she was trying to get Din to figure this all out on his own. And so he says, then I will adopt him. And then she says, this is the way, putting that emphasis on this. And this makes me want to go back to all of the previous episodes with her in it. Look through it with this lens to see if this is what she was doing the whole time, guiding Din to figure these things out on his own. I have not liked her. I have been very suspicious of her. I thought she was a traitor. And I was super stoked in this episode to see that there were no spies last episode.
Agreed.
She and Axe come through. This scene makes me want to go back and see if she's just doing these things to guide him. She can't tell him what his way is, but she can guide him to this. And when she says this is the way, that was a nice little bow on this season. It's ending this reluctant father arc. That scene made me feel so many things, and I love the armor now. That was so cool to see and think about in that way.
Listeners, you can't see, but I am nodding my head the whole time. Yeah, I love that. And you know what? I've always kind of been intrigued by the armorer. Really interesting character. But yeah, you're like, what side does she fall on? Why is she kind of speaking out both sides of her mouth? And then the whole spy thing last episode. Again, great writing here to fool everyone into thinking Axe Woves and the armorer are inside plants. Maybe this is just viewers at home having too much ego, thinking they've figured out the grand scheme of the writing, when you're like, no, the Mandalorians are together. Of course, they're sticking together, but you can't see their faces. Like you said, you only get the helmet, which can really spotlight on certain moments, depending on how they articulate it with their movements. There's a lot of emotion you miss when you're looking at just a helmet versus a human face. The way you're phrasing it sounds very definitive to me, and I'm liking that. We can now just be armorer stans if we were not already. And you're right, to go back and look at that with new eyes. Was it the whole time that she was guiding Din? That's beautiful. And especially when she's when she says you're out of the clan, challenging, his loyalty. Where does it lie? Are you going to be the father? Are you going to step up to the plate? And he does. This is the way. Yeah, I love it. I'm on board.
We've been interpreting this as a very cult vibes, where she's very black and white and you're not allowed to do this, or but you can do this and all this stuff. What if this one scene right here puts kind of a new context onto all of the things she's done previously, right? Teaching him about the Darksaber, making him go to Mandalore, again, guiding him to figure these answers out on his own, to make him the best of them and to make him the father. I'd be curious to see, let us know, listeners, in comments and stuff, what you thought of this, if this connected with you at all, because this really was a major pivotal moment in the series for me. We're talking about the final battle, and you had mentioned Bo and Din and Grogu taking on Gideon. Did you notice that at no point did Grogu use the Force for attack?
Yes, all defense, pulling the weapons away or just pushing people back. No force choke. Like you said, it'd be a little ridiculous if all of a sudden he's a baby. He doesn't have those powers quite yet.
Yeah. So last episode we talked, I had said I kind of want some big force action from Grogu. And we didn't really get it in this episode. And while he's doing all of that, I was thinking what great training he's had either from Luke or Kelleran. Whereas in the first season, he was still repressing a lot of his memories, repressing a lot of his training. And we saw him maybe be a little bit more physically harmful. I think that was really great to see. And it's also important to keep in mind that he is a child, right? I think we are expecting too much of the character to be this like uber force sensitive. We want the Jedi to come in and save the day and use his powers. But we're dealing with, although 50 years old or 53 or 55, however old Grogu is now, is still like manifested as a child. And so even him being in this fight was incredible. And then he has seen the Mandalorians be maybe a more violent culture and stuff like that, but he is still only using his powers for defense.
I also freaking love the sound effect when he does a backflip. The like, boom, boom, when he's running away from those Praetorian guards. It's great. Excellent job.
He goes behind those doors, and that's when I expected something Force-y to happen, but he just runs around the lights on the top of the thing.
I loved it because, like you said, he can't really fight them off. They've got these like crazy weapons, and like I'm sure they probably didn't want to like harm him. They probably wanted to just capture him. Maybe it makes sense that he was fighting, defensively rather than offensively. I love that. It totally worked.
Yeah,
for me.
I don't think, like I said earlier, they might not know who or what he is, right? That was all Gideon's thing. There's probably no chance he even told the rest of the Empire about him.
Oh, right. Those guards came out of nowhere. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those were like contracted.
Right. Does this episode change what you thought about where Grogu's story will go? We've speculated a little bit on like who Grogu will become in the future.
Well, the armorer says, you've got to take him on adventures like your master took you. And I was like, I wonder what Din did when he was a kid. Maybe we need some flashback to that. Like, what is a Mandalorian's training? We maybe saw a little bit with like Ragnar. You get inducted into the tribe and then you go through basic training or whatever, but you also go on adventures. We don't know what those adventures are. We know kind of what the Jedi do, that they like learn about the powers, the philosophy, and that they eventually go through the trials and they move up through the ranks. So some sort of similar thing, it seems like. Yeah, I wonder what he does next. Like Din is not going to teach him Force stuff unless maybe they run into some Jedi and he's like, hey, maybe we can get you some like extracurricular training with another Jedi, because I can't teach you that. Like, maybe that'll still be part of one of their adventures. But otherwise, like, what is he going to teach them? Like, hand-to-hand combat? Like, they're totally different stature. Like, presumably they don't have the IG anymore, that they've donated that back to Navarro. So he's back to just being regular, flesh Grogu, rather than like mechanical Grogu. So yeah, I wonder what their adventures will include. Like, what training does he need? Like, do they have to go on specific journeys, like, and learn specific lessons? I don't know. And maybe we'll find out the different badges you have to earn to become a Mandalorian, right?
I wish I could come up with a Scout or Weebelo pun.
Man, I've been biting my tongue to make the comparisons with the Scouts, but I feel there's a lot of similarities there with like, you take this oath, you promise to do good for your community and whatnot. It's very similar to being in this cult of Mandalorians.
Right.
This is the way. On my honor, I will do my best to do my duty.
We've speculated a little bit about him becoming the unifier of Mandalore by being a Jedi and a Mandalorian and wielding the Darksaber, but now the Darksaber has been destroyed. Does that change that? Like, is there still the potential for him to become this Mandalorian leader, or do we even still want that after the nice definitive ending of this episode?
Well, I did think there was some foreshadowing when he peers down into the waters and then they zoom into the mythosaur. He's got this connection with animals. Literally the last scene is him force levitating an animal.
Yeah.
So I don't know if like he was like, something's down there, and I have the connection with that. If that's foreshadowing anything in the future or not, who knows? But the Darksaber's gone. Din said it didn't mean anything to him. Axe Woves said it meant a lot to him, but it's gone now. And Axe Woves was there yelling, for Mandalore! So apparently that doesn't matter anymore. Like the Darksaber, you want me to take on the whole Empire with a laser sword? Like, it don't matter. It's just a trinket,
Yep. Very good point. I didn't even think about that with Axe, who put so much emphasis on it. I love that. I also love that scene of Grogu like touching the mind of the mythosaur. I really hope that comes back up, that is of importance later on. Before you mentioned the thing about Axe, I was kind of a little bit like, oh, well, maybe Grogu will rebuild the Darksaber. Like Tar Vizsla was the first Jedi Mandalorian, and now if Grogu's the next, he'll remake the Dark. But now I don't know if I want that as much, because you're right. Like now these two different tribes have compromised, have come together, and for one it didn't mean anything, and for the others it meant everything, and now they're in the middle. The Darksaber brought them together in its destruction, which I also think is like very beautiful and would maybe take away from that if it's reforged.
I think that's part of the legend now. It was lost in the great battle of the return to Mandalore. The return of Grogu and Din and their classic adventures, but the return of Mandalorians together on their home world reuniting.
And now they can be farmers.
life finds a way. What a season. Listeners, we got to keep this conversation going because who knows when we're going to get more Mandalorian, so we've got to keep it alive in the comment section. Leave us your thoughts here on YouTube or hit us up wherever you love to social media. We are there and we want to hear from you. And make sure to subscribe for some more coverage. We're going to have another kind of season review of The Mandalorian coming up shortly with the other hosts of Krypton to Alderaan. And we're going to have lots more podcasts and videos coming up soon as well. And we would love to have you back for those. Thank you for listening to the show today. I've been Royce.
I've been Din Joey.
And we've been Krypton to
This little
Alderaan.
cabin with a little pond. It's got frogs in it and keepers and all kinds of stuff.
To all